Have you heard about this? I mean, some people are saying that building one of those really powerful AI models could cost you like $78 million dollars.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, right? Welcome to Econverse. We like to dig deep into the economic forces that are kind of, shaping the world around us. And today we're talking about something that's both a technological revolution and, well, a big money game, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to really get into the economics of actually building and training AI. Everybody talks about the cool stuff AI can do, writing code, figuring out medical diagnoses, but what does it actually cost to make all that happen? That's what we're going to find out today.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to cover, from the overall costs of AI development in 2025 to what it takes to train those massive language models you keep hearing about. We want to break it all down for you, give you the key takeaways and maybe some surprising numbers without making it too technical.
Think of this as your crash course on the financial side of AI. So, whether you're wondering how much it would cost to get a basic AI tool for your business or how much money goes into something like, I don't know, a self-driving car program, we'll give you the rundown. We'll talk about average costs, what makes those costs go up or down, and even some smart ways to manage those investments. So, if I want to start a basic AI project, where do I even start with budgeting? What am I looking at cost-wise?
So you might see some really low numbers out there, like $5,000 for a very basic AI project. But to be honest, that's probably just for the simplest things you can do with AI. If you want something that's actually useful in the real world, especially if you want to use some of the newer, fancier AI, it's going to cost a lot more. The costs for the really advanced AI solutions can easily go over $500,000.
So those low prices are kind of misleading then. What's a more realistic number if I want to build something useful?
A good starting point is something called a minimum viable product, or MVP. It's basically a very simple version of your AI tool that actually works, and it often uses those generative AI models from companies like OpenAI or Anthropic. For something like that, you're probably looking at somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000, and that's just to get started. And we're talking at least 3 months of development time too.
Wow, that's a lot more than those initial numbers. Why is there such a big difference?
Right. You might read that a lot of AI development projects cost somewhere between $10,000 and $49,000. But it seems like those numbers might not be telling the whole story. It takes a lot of work to build even a somewhat complicated AI, like a decent chatbot or a reliable machine learning model. Things like preparing the data, training the model, and testing it all add up really fast.
So it's not just about having a cool AI idea. The actual work of building it is expensive, even if it's a relatively basic AI. So for people who are thinking about using AI, what are the biggest factors that determine how much it costs?
There are a bunch of things that affect the cost, but one of the biggest is how much you have to pay the people who can actually build these systems, the developers. And those developer rates can be all over the place. It really depends on where they are and how much experience they have. You might find developers in India for as low as $25 an hour, but in Poland, it might be closer to $50 an hour. In the US, it's more like $99 an hour, and in Australia, you could be paying up to $149 an hour. So yeah, where you find your development team is a big deal for your budget.
That makes sense. But besides just paying the developers, the type of AI you're building must also affect the cost. Like, how do the costs compare for different AI approaches?
Totally. Let's start with the simpler stuff. There are things called rule-based systems. Think of those basic chatbots that just follow a script. Those might cost as little as $10,000 to develop because they're not that complicated and don't need a ton of data.
And as the AI gets more advanced, the price goes up, I'm guessing.
You got it. If you want to use those powerful language models, the ones we talked about earlier, for things like generative AI solutions, it's going to cost you more. An MVP could easily cost $50,000 to $60,000. Then there are machine learning models. These are the things that can learn from data to make predictions, like spam filters. Developing one of those will probably cost you at least $50,000 too.
And what about the really cool AI we see in the news, like facial recognition and stuff like that? How much does that
We're
cost?
talking serious money now. For deep learning and neural networks, the technology behind things like facial recognition and image processing, you're looking at starting costs of around $100,000. And why? Because these systems need a ton of data and a lot of computing power. They often use special hardware called GPUs, or graphics processing units, to do all the training and processing. And if you want even more complex AI, like natural language processing or computer vision, the things that power virtual assistants that'll cost you even more, you're probably looking at a starting price of $150,000 because the algorithms are so complicated and they need so much data.
So the more complex and the more data the AI needs, the more expensive it gets. That makes sense. You also mentioned that the complexity of the project itself affects the cost. Can you give an example of how that works?
Sure. Imagine building a simple chatbot that just answers basic questions about a company's hours. That's pretty straightforward and wouldn't cost that much. But now imagine building an AI that can predict when machines in a factory are going to break down. That system would have to analyze a huge amount of data from sensors in real time, make predictions, and then connect to the factory's control systems. That's a whole other level of complexity, and it would be way more expensive to build and maintain than a simple chatbot.
Data really seems to be the key for AI. How does the type of data and how much of it you need affect the cost?
Data is everything in AI. And getting the right data can get really expensive. Just collecting and preparing the data can cost $10,000 or more, depending on how hard it is to get. If you need a ton of data, like millions of images that have been carefully tagged for computer vision, you could easily spend $50,000 just on storing, processing, and training with all that data. Even just tagging the data, like, say, identifying all the objects in those images, can cost around $30,000, especially if you need experts to do it right. And don't forget about keeping that data secure and private, which is incredibly important. That can add another $20,000 or more to the cost.
So, giving the AI the right information to learn from is a huge part of the cost. What about the performance of the AI? Does it cost more to make the AI really accurate or to make it seem more human-like?
It definitely does. If you need super high accuracy, like for self-driving cars, it's going to cost a lot more. Think about it.
Yeah.
Companies have spent billions of dollars to make self-driving cars as safe as possible. And if you need the AI to work in real time, like, say, a drone that has to make decisions in a split second, the algorithms have to be super fast and complex, which drives up the cost. And then there's continuous learning, which is what powers those recommendation engines like Netflix. Those systems are constantly updating themselves with new information, and that costs millions of dollars every year.
It's amazing how much the demands on the AI affect the development costs, and I imagine the technology used to build the AI also plays a role in the cost.
Yeah, for sure. If you're using those big language models, you might have to pay based on how much text the AI processes. That can add up fast if you're using it a lot. And then there's computing power. Whether you're renting access to really powerful processors in the cloud or buying your own expensive hardware, that's a huge chunk of the cost. And while there are some free tools you can use to develop AI, you might need special engineers to use them, and the professional tools often cost money to license. Plus, you have to test the AI really thoroughly to make sure it works right, and then you have to set it up so people can actually use it. And after all that, you still have to maintain it and keep it updated. Just think about all the complicated simulations they have to run to make sure self-driving car software is safe. That's incredibly expensive.
Wow, so many things add to the total cost of an AI project. A lot of businesses might be wondering if they have to build everything from scratch. How do the costs compare between building your own custom AI and using something that's already built?
That's a great question. Pre-built AI solutions, like those chatbots you see on websites, are usually cheaper up front. You might pay around $5,000 to set it up, and then maybe $1,000 to $10,000 each year to keep it running. They're also faster to set up, but they're not very flexible. You can't really customize them that much, and they might not work well if you have very specific or complex needs.
What about building a custom AI solution?
That's going to cost you a lot more upfront. We're talking about things like custom recommendation engines for online stores or AI tools that can extract information from documents. Think about it. You're paying for a whole team of developers, you're buying or collecting special data, you're setting up the necessary infrastructure, and then you're paying for testing and maintenance, which could easily be more than $5,000 a year. But the big advantage is that you get exactly what you need. It's way more flexible. For example, building Amazon's recommendation system probably cost them more than $100,000. And even something that seems simple, like an AI that extracts data from receipts, could cost $60,000 or more just to get a basic version working.
So it's a trade-off. You can save money and time with pre-built solutions, but you lose some control and flexibility. Custom AI gives you more power and control, but costs a lot more. Another decision businesses have to make is whether to build the AI themselves or hire someone else to do it. What are the cost differences there?
If you build an in-house AI team, you're in control. You can customize everything exactly how you want it, and you own all the intellectual property. But it's a big investment. You have to hire and train people, and you need to set up all the infrastructure. It can also take a long time to build a good team and actually get the AI built. Outsourcing, on the other hand, can be cheaper upfront, and you can get access to experts without having to hire them permanently. But you might not have as much control over the project, and there could be some issues with intellectual property and communication.
It sounds like both options have their pros and cons, cost-wise. Now let's talk about those large language models, or LLMs. They've been in the news a lot, and you mentioned earlier that they can be really expensive to train. What are these models, and why do they cost so much to train?
LLMs are a type of AI that uses these giant neural networks. They're trained on mountains of text data. We're talking billions or even trillions of words. This lets them understand language like humans do, and they can do all sorts of things. They can power chatbots, write different kinds of content, summarize long documents, and even help with complex reasoning. Some famous examples are GPT-3, BERT, and T5. The reason they're so expensive to train is because of all the data and the massive amount of computing power they need.
Can you break down those costs for us? What makes training these models so expensive?
Sure. There are direct costs and indirect costs. One of the biggest direct costs is the hardware. They use these high-end GPUs, which are kind of like specialized computer processors designed for AI. These GPUs can cost thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars each. To train an LLM, you might need hundreds or even thousands of these GPUs running for weeks or months. So you can imagine how the cost can add up quickly. We're talking hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars just for the hardware. And then if you're not using your own hardware, you have to pay for cloud computing resources. Renting those powerful virtual machines with GPUs can also get really expensive, especially when you need them for a long time.
The data itself must be a huge part of the cost too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting and preparing all the data you need to train an LLM is another major expense. You might have to pay to license private data sets, which can cost a fortune. Plus, there's all the work of cleaning, formatting, and preparing the data for training. Just that step can cost tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the data, and then you have to pay the people who work on the project. Training these advanced models requires highly skilled AI researchers and engineers, and they don't come cheap. Even a small team working on an LLM for a few months can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries.
And I bet the time it takes to train these models adds to the cost too.
Definitely. You can't just train one of these models overnight. It could take days, weeks, or even months of nonstop computing. For example, they say that training GPT-3 required thousands of GPUs running for over a month. Just the electricity and computing costs for that were millions of dollars.
It's mind-blowing how much it costs. So when we hear about the costs of training those famous LLMs, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Estimates suggest that the first training run for GPT-3 could have cost anywhere from $4.6 million to $12 million. And the newer, even more advanced models like GPT-4 and Google's PaLM and Gemini probably cost tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to train.
That is a lot of money. What are the main reasons why these models are so expensive to train?
A few things. One is the model itself. The bigger and more complex the model, the more data and computing power you need. Two is what you're using the model for. If you need to do something very specific, you might need even more data that's been carefully selected. Three is getting and managing all that data. Four is all the computing resources you need. And five, you need really smart, highly trained people to do all this work.
So there's a lot of pressure to find ways to reduce these costs. What are some ways that companies can manage and lower the costs of AI development and LLM training?
There are a lot of things companies can do. One is to use open source tools and frameworks, which are free to use. TensorFlow and PyTorch are good examples. This can save a lot of money on software licenses. Another good strategy, especially for those LLMs, is to use pre-trained models. Platforms like Hugging Face offer these models, which are already trained on a lot of data. You can then fine-tune them for your specific needs, which can save you a ton of time and money. In some cases, it can reduce training costs by up to 90%.
That's amazing. What else can companies do?
They can also use cloud computing services from companies like AWS and Google Cloud. This can be cheaper than buying and maintaining your own hardware, especially if you use special features like spot instances, which give you discounts on computing power, and auto-scaling, which automatically adjusts your computing resources as needed. Another helpful tip is to use agile development methods, which break projects down into smaller steps. This lets you get feedback quickly and avoid making costly mistakes later on. And don't forget about optimizing your data collection. Maybe you can get away with using publicly available data sets or be more targeted in how you collect data. You could even outsource some of the work, like data labeling, to specialized companies or freelancers. And of course, building a smart team is essential. Maybe you can mix experienced developers with less experienced ones, or you can train your existing employees to do AI work.
It sounds like you have to get creative to keep the costs down. Are there any technical tricks that can help too?
Yeah, for sure. AutoML tools can help automate some parts of the development process, so you don't need as many experts. And you can start by building a minimum viable product, or MVP, which has just the essential features that can help control those initial costs. It's also really important to keep track of your operating costs and look for ways to be more efficient. Sometimes you can partner with universities to get access to resources and expertise. There are also data exchanges where you can get data sets more cheaply. And there are a bunch of technical things you can do to lower the computational costs, like using the newest GPUs, special training techniques, and ways to make the model smaller and more efficient. So it sounds like you really have to think about the costs from all angles. At the end of the day, businesses need to know if their AI investment is paying off. How can they measure the return on investment, or ROI, for their AI projects? To figure out the ROI, you have to compare all the costs of the project, the development, the infrastructure, the maintenance, with all the benefits. And those benefits can be both tangible and intangible. Tangible benefits are things you can measure, like increased productivity, lower operating costs, or higher sales. Intangible benefits are things that are harder to measure, like gaining a competitive advantage, making better decisions with data, or creating a more innovative culture in your company. A good ROI analysis should try to measure both types of benefits as much as possible.
So it's not just about the money you make, it's also about the strategic value that AI can bring to your company.
That's right. So as you can see, the economics of AI are pretty complicated. Building and training AI, especially the cutting-edge stuff, is a big investment. And it's important for anyone who wants to use AI to really understand those costs, from how much developers get paid to the huge amount of computing power needed to train those advanced models.
Whether you're a startup with a cool AI idea or a big company looking to use AI to improve your business, understanding the costs and knowing how to manage them is really important. The potential of AI is enormous, but it's not free.
We hope this deep dive into the costs of AI in 2025 has given you a better understanding of what it takes to invest in this technology. And maybe it's even given you some new insights into the value of AI.
We love hearing from our listeners. What do you think about the cost of AI? Are there any specific things we talked about that you'd like to explore more in a future deep dive? Let us know what you think.
And if you found this discussion helpful, please share it with others who might be interested. And be sure to subscribe to Econverse wherever you get your podcasts for more deep dives into the economic forces shaping our world. See you next time.